Hey, Politikiwi, how are you, mate?
Yeah, doing well, lads. Doing well. Yourself?
Yeah, good. How's the greens going to go, my friend?
Oh, well, look, we're going to get over 15%. I'm calling
Okay,
it.
good. What's up tonight?
Oh, God, that soundboard's not going to get annoying. Definitely not. No, doing well. I thought I would I'd take the bait and jump in a bit on that conversation on platforming, since it was the one
Yeah.
just before opening it up. So I thought I typed a note so I could organize my thoughts better, so I
Perfect.
don't just ramble here. So I thought breaking it down into a few comments. First off, I understand a lot of the framing you were talking about before was on the Twitter mob, and for what it's worth, I don't think they're that representative of what was the thought I used? Oh, they're not representative of more than idle comments in people's idle time.
Yeah, great. I agree.
Which is often when they're given that criticism of, I know you were talking about it before, of they're not actually engaging with the content. And I think for a broad extent that's true, especially on the Juliet Moses stuff, because for what it's worth on that specific interview, I think you guys handled the examination really well. I think if we're talking about platforming, the only question you could ask about Juliet Moses was she the best spokesperson for the topic? To which I think the answer pretty reasonably is yes, she was the best spokesperson given the time frame you guys are working on.
Well, and also the thing you have to remember is we went to the Jewish community, and they said, "Here's our person for you to talk to on this issue." What do we then say? No, fuck off. Like, you imagine if we went to the Muslim community and they said, "Here's your person," and we go, "No, don't want that." Or we went to the trans community, or we went to whatever. It's like we actually did some due diligence, and then there were some problematic parts for some people. I mean, like, I'll tell you something, and this will get me grief. I think me and Chewy are in a different area. I would talk to Juliet again on issues around the Jewish Council. I don't know if Chewy's in the same camp as me, but if she's a spokesperson for the Jewish Council, if we're going to be talking issues about the Jewish Council, she can be a spokesperson for it. Now, other issues that she's controversial on, she wouldn't be my first choice. I'm not saying she's even my first choice for Jewish, quote unquote, Jewish issues, but if it was about the Jewish Council, if it was interaction with the Jewish Council, and she is their media spokesperson, what do we expect?
No, exactly. I think tipping my hat to the standard sort of leftist, I'm going to use intellectual generously here. Obviously, that's one of the issues when you talk about like intersectional values and issues, right? Because if you're talking to people in a minority community, they have various different opinions, and a lot of them are more conservative than others, especially ones in more institutional positions. You're more often like the council. I'm sure the council for the Jewish community is probably a lot more conservative than some elements in the Jewish community, but they're still probably the only close thing you're going to find to an actual spokesperson for that community, which is it's a tiring issue. But I wanted to talk about, because I think the main comment I kind of took issue with was when talking about legitimizing as platforming, and when you were drawing the question of like, oh well, David Seymour could be called a turf. Does that mean we just don't platform him, right? Because I can see where you're coming from, but I wanted to talk about that for a second, if that's all right.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sweet. I think there's, in my head, I would break it down as, I think there's three types of figures that you could bring on to interview, right? So you have an institutional figure, like a politician, like David Seymour, because unfortunately he keeps getting elected for some godforsaken reason. You've got non-institutional but public figures, regular, like very, very well-known pundits or experts or spokespersons for a community, like Juliet Moses. And then you have non-institutional, non-public figures, like a random Twitter user or a random protester you call off on the side of the street when you want to ask him, why are you out here? I don't think you can realistically, and someone like BHN, I don't think can legitimize people who are institutional figures or non-institutional, non-public figures, right? You don't have enough rep to improve the brand of Seymour or damage the brand of Seymour.
Dude, harsh.
Nor do I think
harsh much? Holy moly.
Well, maybe wait till the merch sells out, and
Okay, sure.
and then you will. And likewise, a random Twitter user is only ever going to, at best, blow up on Twitter. And I think the real swinging point can be the types of pundits, experts, and quote unquote spokespersons. The risk around those roles in particular is because a lot of those people are reliant on their brand, and in a way BHN is too, right? Where, if they're seen as a legitimate figure, they'll get more airtime because they're a legitimate figure.
Okay.
And I think the risk is, and I can see what I think BHN handled it correctly in this instance, where you were talking about a very specific issue that relates to a very specific community, And for that reason, you would talk to this person because they are a legitimate spokesperson, for better or worse, for that community on that topic. But I think those are the people you're actually those are the ones we should be worried about when we're talking about platforming, are people whose job is to represent communities and their currency is their legitimacy, because those are the people we're interviewing them or not interviewing. That determines realistically whether they're going to even be considered for interviewing 3 months down the line.
That's a really good point. And I think when Pat's talking about how he and I may be on different pages with this particular guest, I think that's where I diverge, is that particular point. I mean, I reached out to a friend of mine who's involved in the Jewish community, and I said, hey, look, we're getting pushback on this person. I don't know why. And he went, yes, she's dreadful, and so is the Jewish Council. They're very conservative. They're very one note on this. Here's a list of other people that you can call. And I frantically ran around contacting those people. And the difference in response was really interesting. One of them, and I'm probably mangling the quote, but he says, I have absolutely zero interest in talking about this tonight. It is a non-issue in the eyes of this Jew. I was like, okay, well, that is still a quote.
But let me add one thing in here. Maybe my weakness in this whole thing is I often approach these like a talkback show, and they're not. But I think because okay, so they've got some very conservative views. If people aren't aware of, even when I've never really spoken about Palestine on this conversation, but with all the other political information I've put out about myself, I think it'll be pretty clear to know where I would stand on those conversations in general. So they're a very conservative group. Sure. If we were going to talk about something to do with the Vatican, why would I shy away from getting on like a spokesperson from the Catholic Church in Wellington, who might also be part of a much more conservative than me? I guess I'm approaching it more like a news story and using them more like a source. Now, I'm being honest, maybe that's a blind spot. I just wonder if it's because there's some buzzwords around various people, the turf word, the Palestine word. I'm not saying there shouldn't be, by the way, but if it was another group with a very, very conservative world take, there may not be quite the same issue with it. And I guess from a content creator who wants to put out good content, let's be honest, but be accurate and have good conversations, I don't think personally just they're very conservative is enough to strike them out of my contacts book. Even though I'm not, obviously.
I think that's something that makes BHN work really well, right? Is that Pat and I are not necessarily in lockstep.
We hate each other.
Every issue.
Yeah.
Oh, we're like cats and dogs when the microphones are off. I mean, really early on. What was that? Like straight up neo-Nazi that you interviewed really early on?
The surname was Hake, H-A-K-E.
Hake, yeah, because it's really close to hate. That was a real moment for me, because I was just like, well, I don't know about this man. And look, there was heaps of talk about it. It went on for days, and then the interview went ahead, and it's a fucking good interview. Because it was literally, in my opinion, a masterclass of give him enough rope and he'll hang himself. Like his arguments didn't stand up to a slightest push. His positions were nonsensical. And that idea of like platforming someone, that was really formative for me, because I was like, if you're platforming someone, you're doing it in a way that's going to benefit them, right? Not if they look like an absolute chump. Not if we're holding them up for ridicule. Not if we're holding them up to people to go, hey, did you know that these people and these views exist? This is literally know your enemy territory here. And this is a debate about, counter protest as well. Maybe they wouldn't get enough press if you didn't counter protest. This is something that I've been arguing about since the early 2000s when I first started doing anti-fascism work. Maybe we shouldn't do a counter protest because National Front are doing a protest in front of Parliament. And I was just like, no, they need to see that someone stands against this sort of stuff. And Fire and the Fury is a great example. People didn't know where the Parliament protesters came from. It sprung up and they didn't know.
Do you know?
So you've got to understand where these channels of misinformation and who's getting sucked into them and who's going into what movement and how to combat it. It's information.
Do you know what part of it might be? And we need to go shortly, Politikiwi, but we'll give you the last word because Brett's still waiting in the waiting room for us. Do you know what part of it might be? And I don't want to sound arrogant. This is going to sound really arrogant, but I've been doing this for a really long fucking time. You know, I worked for a talkback station talking to hundreds and hundreds of people a week for over a decade. I interviewed all the leaders, world leaders. You know, I've done this for a really long time. And I'm not going to be arrogant enough to say I never got taken advantage of in an interview. But I come with receipts normally, and I wonder if part of my precious side, when I said before, maybe it's that the elites who say who can and can't speak because they trust them and they don't trust others. It's because we're just a couple of chumps in Dunedin talking on the internet. They might not be aware or want to give credit for actually the skill set that's behind what we do. And when you see someone like James Hake, I think it gets showing through, Chewy. I'm not trying to say yay me, but I think there's actually an element of truth in that.
No, absolutely.
Yeah. Politikiwi, do you want to wrap up?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a very good point, and I think that's a point I want to touch on a little bit. There was another line that that had been said before, that Chewy had mentioned before, about how some of the people on Twitter have probably had the argument hundreds of times and just come in with such a degree of uncharitability, right? And I think that's a really common issue on the left, where you have the exhausted radical and the fresh-faced moderate, where you have someone who's entered into any political discussion. And platforming is a really good one because it happens a lot, basically every time you have someone on, where it's an issue where the people there have been people who have had this conversation hundreds of times, and as such, when topics are raised, especially arguments they've seen before, they look on them very uncharitably and they don't consider it very much, and they'll toss it aside really quickly. And you have the moderates who are expressing an opinion or a view that might be pretty much new to them. They might have recently seen a source or something like that, and will just be in shock and horror at how unprofessionally it was just brushed aside, like it wasn't a valued point at all. But I think both of those positions it's an unfortunate balance on the left, because both of those positions are in some case valid. We all have to start from somewhere.
Yeah.
But equally, once you're there for a long time, it's really hard to look at other pundits, political figures, other people online charitably at all. It's hard to take each new conversation as a fresh start and a fresh face.
Yeah.
And it's one of the things I disagree. I feel like I disagree with Pat more than Chewy, but it's the one thing I will say to Pat's credit especially is you're far more positive than I could ever be in a show like this, because holy crap, I would have pulled my hair out a long time ago.
I love it, bro, mate. I was just saying to Chewy last night, like, to be really honest, to show behind the curtain, me and Chewy are going, how are we going to sustain this beyond the election? Like, we're basically doing this not for nothing. We've got lovely people getting, shirts and that kind of stuff, but I'm probably earning about $3 an hour on the work I've been putting into this. But I'm just in love with this. I love it so much. I love talkback. I love this kind of world. And at the moment, with such good numbers we're getting of people live and interacting, that I'm loving it even more. So when you say I'm positive, I'm like, I just love it. I love this kind of stuff. If there was another job in talkback again, I don't know if I would do it because I'd have to give up this, but I love it. It's just such a lot of fun. Thanks, Politikiwi.